Hello, this is Dr. Marty Lerman with Mental Wellness. We are coming to you from the amazing studio here in Humble, Texas. Thanks to Bob and Linda and John's brilliant technology knowledge, which is fascinating in the end. We are going to spend some time today. Initially, we were going to talk about relationships, which we're going to actually bring into the conversation today, but it's not going to be the focal point. As you're all aware, we are dealing with something that is far more consuming right now. It's on the minds of just about everybody, or at least it should be on the minds of just about everybody, which is the pandemic. This coronavirus sweeping through the world right now. And the United States is certainly not immune to it, and we probably going to be taking the lead in this thing in just a little while as some of the European countries are peaking and then leveling themselves off from it. Our biggest dilemma at this country is that we don't have the same kind of enforcement that's going on around the rest of the world to quarantine people away and to have them just stay in place. We just got the word here in the Harris County, which houses Houston and Humboldt and Kingwood and several other communities, that our leaders are decided not to issue an order for people to stay at home and stay in place, rather making it continue to be on a voluntary basis. And our governor has not done anything beyond telling restaurants and gathering places to not do that. So we're running into, unfortunately, a situation where a lot of people who are either asymptomatic of the virus or people who may actually have the virus, but because the testing has been so inadequate, they may not even know they're walking around with the illness. And they're continuing to gather around people at beaches and at parks, and they're doing things that under normal circumstances would be okay, but given what we're dealing with right now, there's far too much latitude about people's perception of what's okay and what's not. And again, what we're dealing with is a very serious illness. We are also very much aware that from the research that is coming out based on the actual testing as opposed to supposition and guesses, is that the age frame that originally we were under the working knowledge of, and that it was hitting mostly older people over the age of 60, people with pre-existing lung and coronary issues, are not the only targeted population. It's also affecting people between the ages of 20 and 48. Apparently, some of the research coming out of New York, where they're actually doing the testing and actually have empirical data rather than guessing, are showing that almost 47% of all the new cases of people testing positive for the virus are in that age group of 20 to 48. So we've got misinformation that's been going on for a while. Malaria cures are not really an answer to what we're looking for. And yet we continue not to have the kind of messaging that I think would be most useful for people to be equipped with the actual knowledge so we know exactly what's going on. Instead, what we're dealing with is a lot of misinformation that creates more uncertainty and leads into the anxiety and the panic, which is the part of what we're going to talk about today, is how to understand your reaction to what is being presented to us and how to temper it in a way that we're not allowing our emotions to run over our common sense and able to still take necessary precautions without creating that sense of doom or the perception that there's nothing wrong and we should be able to do whatever we want because that's who we are. So we're in the middle of that place, and what we're going to do is to present hopefully some better ways of trying to cope on an individual basis, as well as be able to guide children and loved ones and their parents perhaps about self-care and what that means to be able to really focus on the issues that are the closest to us, which are the people that we care about and love. So that's going to be the structure of the program, which, like I said, is going to involve relationships. I'm going to pass out, I'm not going to pass it out, I'm going to share contact information because we do ask that you send in your emails to us. That is the most effective way for communicating to us other than phone calls that we can't take live, but we can take after the show. And I am more than glad to respond to those as best I can as time allows. Again, the information that we're sharing with you over the air is not a direct therapy. It's not in lieu of medical advice, so please don't take it that way. What we are sharing with you is information that is coming across that we can factually support based on the actual information that we believe to be real. And at that understanding, certainly passing along ways of managing and coping with stress, which has been around way longer than this pandemic has been around. And they've been proven to be very effective tools. So that takes in a whole lot of the material of what we're going to do. Now, the initial part of what I want to talk about is how do we recognize when we're being stressed? Because that is not always an assumption that we should be allowed to ignore, because we begin showing signs of stress before our brain is telling us we are stressed. The information has a relay process that sometimes can take a while before we're able to categorize it, define it, and then do something about it. So what I'd like to do is present the information to you so you have a working knowledge of what stress actually involves, how to define it, and then we'll talk about some very constructive ways of actually being able to release it and let it go so it doesn't dominate and dictate our thoughts and our ability to actually be in control of what we're experiencing inside of ourselves. So what we're looking at when we define stress is simply a change. Any change to us, whether it's environmental, emotional, or spiritual, is going to involve some kind of a stress reaction. Now, keep in mind, not all stress is bad. Sometimes it can be very helpful. Sometimes it can be very directive in terms of action we should be taking to keep ourselves safe and healthy. And yet at other times it can be just absolutely horrible because it gives us an emotional disconnect and we find ourselves unable to respond to it appropriately. And that would be the negative part of what stress involves. But the important part of understanding the stress is that any change, and of course what we're experiencing right now with the virus is a major change in that we're being directed into doing things that typically we don't have to deal with, like keeping ourselves 6 feet apart from other people, not hugging and kissing people that we normally would be hugging and kissing perhaps, and doing things that create a reaction that is not normal for how we conduct ourselves, or in some cases how we conduct our business, which is another issue that we have to be also very cognizant of. So the question of whether we are or whether we're not, we make the assumption that because change is happening almost universally, at least around us, it's affecting us because we are being exposed to stress. We are experiencing the stress. I think it'd be absolutely ridiculous to assume that we're not, because there's way too much indication that all the changing that's going on around us and within us is going to elicit that kind of a reaction. So we're going to assume that everybody listening to our program, as well as me, as well as our producers and our clinical people and our technicians, we're all being exposed to stress, including our partners, our kids, our other folks that are involved with us. So we're going to work off of that assumption, okay? And in order to do that, we can now move forward. So I'm going to share with you some of the psychological issues that go along with stress, because that's the part that I specialize in. And I'm also going to make you aware of some of the physiological things that happen because of stress as well, because those are the kinds of things that we tend to not identify because they tend to be symptomatically responded to by our doctors. Meaning that if you go into your doctor because you're complaining about being restless or ulcers or you're grinding your teeth, that the assumption is that there's something wrong with those specific things in our bodies, a part of our anatomy that's not working well. So those symptoms are addressed. The bigger picture of what the causality is of those things, unfortunately, tends to be ignored because it's hard to come up with those generalized things. And for the most part, physicians are responding to what they're being presented with. And if those are symptoms, that's what they're going to respond to. So if you're being told that you're losing your hair, there might be something along the way of a topical thing that you put in your scalp, try to keep the hair follicles from dying out on you. If you find yourself with high blood pressure, the chances are you're going to be medicated for the blood pressure to normalize it without taking a look at what the causality of that factor is. If you're responding to other things that are also physical in nature, you're running into somebody who's got acne that's in their mid-40s, and it's way too late in life, you would normally think, for that to present itself. As a stress reaction, as are most skin reactions of any kind. The dermatologist will tell you that rarely do they actually cure the problem. They treat the symptom, how it presents itself. And yet we know that the number one cause of those kinds of reactive physical problems is stress, because stress weakens our immune system. We know that autoimmune reactions, of which there are enormous numbers now of actual legitimate illnesses, like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and then the list keeps going on and on and on. But we now are adding into it rheumatoid arthritis and some of the other reactions are all parts of what we're dealing with because our physiology is responding to the stress, and the stress has a nasty habit of attacking the weakest parts of our body. So we end up with a lot of different kinds of things that the treatment modalities involving these things most often is to treat the symptoms. And the idea is if you make the symptom goes away, the problem goes away. And if the problem's gone away, then it's cured or it's no longer an issue. What we're not looking at is that you stop one problem and there's another one's going to pop up pretty soon because simply balancing out a stress reaction temporarily is not a cure for it. It's simply temporary and it will reappear. We also know that the psychological parts of stress take on an enormous number of issues because what we often find are the obvious ones, which are anxiety and worry. Sometimes the excessive worry, which then becomes anxiety. We also get panic reactions, which is an extenuating sense of what the anxiety can yield. We also find that anger and rage reactions can be quite often triggered by stress. We know that decreased attention span, which then can get misdiagnosed as attention deficit disorder, oftentimes as a result of anxiety. We also know that non-compliance with medical orders is oftentimes a symptom of stress. And we go and see the doctor writes out a prescription, then we discover that 40% of all the patients that are prescribed medications to treat the symptoms aren't taking the medications. It's number one issue that deals with certain kinds of diabetes, where folks are not taking the medications that are being prescribed to them, or they're not following the diet plans, or they're not dealing with the fact they have to increase their cardio activity. So we discovered that the non-compliance issue is actually a stress reaction. We also know that other areas fit into this thing. With fatigue in general is a stress reaction. Being impulsive, being irritable, overreacting to situations, dumping other situations into the current situation. Or we find somebody bringing up things from the past that we'd assumed had been totally worked on and resolved, all of a sudden now reemerges as if it's happening again because it's coupling with other seriously emotionally disturbing issues. So once we understand that these psychological factors are happening, we then have to come up with some kind of an understanding as to how do we deal with this stuff? Because if we don't respond to the internal states that we're showing from the psychological thing, it's then going to move into a behavioral reaction. And we get things like separations and divorces. We get oppositional behavior, where people are doing the opposite of what they're supposed to do. They're excessively argumentative. They tend to isolate themselves more. And then we end up with a major problem because coupled with those things, we get people that are procrastinating, we get people blaming other people for situations, which is unfortunately what happens when you throw politics into any kind of a national emergency. Because you end up with a blame game going on about who caused what, who's responsible for what. None of it really matters because the critical issue is that people are dying. People are getting sick. People aren't able to support their families because they can't work. Those critical issues are now being put on a back burner because people like to argue about whose fault is it and how you point fingers at people, which is not relevant. But we don't know what else to do because we're overly stressed. So we latch on to something that's easy, and we end up taking easy things that don't really matter. It's also a symptom of being stressed. We find ourselves making demands on other people that normally we wouldn't do. Or we lose our ability to be empathic, meaning that we don't understand the emotions of what other people are trying to share with us. Not only do we not understand them, but we don't know how to respond to them in an appropriate kind of way. So we tend to either ignore them, deny them, make things up, put it onto our thing in terms of what we're experiencing, and we end up denying the fact that people are hurting emotionally because of what's going on, because we don't know how to relate to them. So we ignore their need for kindness or just simple human contact. So when we get into these non-responsive kind of areas, we also understand that common sense disappears, which is unfortunately a major issue that we deal with whenever people start to get overly stressed. They start grabbing at answers that don't have anything to do with solving the problem, but we want to believe it. It's one of the overly nationalistic things that comes out of any kind of illness, any kind of pandemic. We went through it in 1918 when the flu was running ravage all over the place. We had countries blaming other countries for it. And now we're starting to get the same nonsense going on about how do we blame China for this, or how do we blame the United States for it. and this continual barraging of negative influence that has nothing to do with the illness or how to make it better, because we still haven't found a cure for this thing. We still don't know how to vaccinate people so they don't get it. And those are the critical issues. So what we want to be able to do is to redirect all of that energy back into a positive thing. But in order to do that, we've got to recognize that these kinds of reactions, these kind of overreactions, are actually the way that stress manifests itself and puts us into a place where we're not dealing with the problem, we're dealing with everything around it. And in order to adequately address it, we got to get that under control. So we start understanding what's real and where's our focus and where are the priorities. That becomes the critical issue for us. So what we're going to do after we take this break, I'm going to share with you some of the contact information with me. I'm constantly being told by my people that we have to put that information out because it's important if you want to reach me. So beyond the email, which is very simple, that one's simply docmarty, DOCMARTY, 61@gmail.com, docmarty61@gmail.com. I'm going to share with you the contact stuff for the website, for the phone numbers, as well as to give you some positive directions for how we're going to change around the stress issue so we start becoming human again and stop reacting to things like robots. We'll be right back. This is Doc Marty with Mental Wellness. We're sharing with you some ways of handling the reaction to the virus and trying to kind of empower people to take back inner control and eliminate some of the worrying and hopefully a lot of the panic reaction that we're starting to see out of folks, because this thing is becoming bigger. Even though we pretty much knew that once we started doing the testing, we were going to get results that were going to be rather alarming. So we're responding to that without turning it into an emotional mess, which is never a pleasant thing to experience. So the contact information, hopefully those of you who want to contact me have their writing utensils available, or a computer, or some kind of a device. I'm going to share this stuff with you so that you can reach out to me and hopefully share information, share your insights, your thoughts. I'm always kind of curious to see what people are coming up with. And I'll share a couple of emails that came in from our last program. The contact through the email again is docmarty, DOCMARTY, 61@gmail.com. If you want to reach me by phone, which is an interesting way to actually have human contact these days, that number is 281-812-3322. 281-812-3322. And if I don't take the call directly, which oftentimes I don't because I'm seeing clients or I'm doing programs like this one, what you will get is my wonderful office manager, Valerie, if you call during the workday, and she will gladly take the information down. Some of the questions she can probably answer for me, but if it's a clinical kind of thing and you want to spend some time with me on the phone, that's perfectly okay. I don't charge fees for brief consultations with people over the phone. What I do is to try to get people to understand that if there's a need for an actual therapy session, whether that be talk therapy or whether it be hypnotherapy, I will certainly let you know that, and you're free to make your choices about how to proceed with that. So you can reach me by phone through the 281-812-3322 number, or you can reach out to me through the Facebook. I do have a Facebook posting that lists Allied Mental Health TX. That is the Facebook. And you can also get me directly through the web, through our website, and that URL is www.allied, A-L-L-I-E-D, mental, M-E-N-T-A-L, health, H-E-A-L-T-H-T-X for Texas.com. Okay, so those are the best ways to reach me. Pony Express doesn't work so well anymore. Ponies are tired, so I don't usually rely on that very well. Snail mail works. I mean, we still get mail delivered to us, but if you're looking for a quicker response, I would suggest not using that. So reaching out generally by email or by phone is great. Texting I tend to stay away from for a couple of reasons. One is that it's not HIPAA approved. It's very easy to hack into texting, and I usually don't respond back to text directly with answers to questions because I don't know who's actually asking the question. And we do get some strange questions, believe it or not, especially when you do the kind of work that I do, as well as doing sex therapy, which also can bring in some very strange questions. I don't mind answering legitimate questions, but the weird ones are very weird. And we were talking about just having a radio show dealing with some of the weirdness that we get sometimes. It's kind of like the bloopers, but these are real things that people are actually sending in. So yeah, we do that. But the phone calls I respond to, generally I'll call back people within the day if I can get to that, certainly within 24 hours. And also the text, or not the text, the emails. So let me move forward a little bit with a couple of emails. One that came in, which I'm going to respond to it, but I'm not putting a whole lot of faith behind the necessity for it. And the question that came in is, why do we not spend more time talking about all these conspiracies? Because some of them probably are true. And for that very reason, we don't, because the probability of them being true is remote at best. And at worst, it's sensationalism and it's exploiting. And I'm not sure there's a validity to any of that nonsense anyway, because most of it turns out to be false. And I see no reason to give it a lot of credibility, because as soon as it goes out over social media, it's assumed to be credible. And unfortunately, that's a major issue we're dealing with right now, is that people are getting things through Facebook and through different social media, and because they're getting it from somebody that they know, they assume it's valid, and then they turn right around after they read it, and even though they're raising their eyebrows, like I raise my eyebrows when I see things it's really difficult to process through, they'll turn around and pass it off to all their quote-unquote friends and relatives, and before you know it, you got a lousy message that's full of conspiratorial nonsense that's being spread to hundreds, thousands, if not millions of people, and yet there's no validity to support it at all. But because so many people have seen it, it's assumed to be valid. So we're not going to give that a whole lot of credence right now. It happens, and that's as far as I'm going to go with that. The second issue that came through was the question of, how do we quiet children's minds so that they can go to sleep and they can do their work, because most of the kids are home now because school's been let out and is not going to be going back in because of the spread of, the fear of spreading the virus for kids. And we're going to talk about how we do that, because quieting the mind of a child involves several different parts to it, and all of the parts are valid. One, we have to validate the concern of the child. We don't want to deny the child has a reality by denying the credibility or the fact that what they're asking has value, because it does. So the first thing we're going to do is to let the child know that, yes, the concern that they have is a real concern. It really is important that we talk about it. And then we move into the second part, which is to give them the assurance that what they're experiencing is not defining them as being inadequate somehow, or as being less than other kids, or is not as good as, because they don't need that negative shaming in response to having a concern about their lives, or about their family's lives, or about their dogs or cats. Because a lot of the kinds of questions that children will ask when this kind of stuff is going on is not only how's it going to affect me, but how's it affect everything around me that I care about. I had one little girl concerned about her goldfish. And from an adult perspective, a goldfish may not seem to be all that important, but to a 6-year-old, that goldfish means a lot. She doesn't have any brothers or sisters. Her folks, unfortunately, are no longer together. And that goldfish serves as kind of a support base for her. And she's concerned about what happens to the goldfish. So the concern has to be validated. Now, you don't validate by lying to a child. You don't tell them that everything's going to be okay, because we can't provide that guarantee. What we can tell them with certainty is that they're loved, they're cared about, and they're valued to us as parents, as to caregivers, is always at the top of our minds and always in our hearts. That assurance is what the children are looking for, because as much as we'd like to promise them absolute safety, we can't do that any more than we can do that when the shootings are going on at the schools, and that panic that happens inside of children's minds is real. So we don't want to give them false messages. We don't want to give them false hope. We don't want to let them know that the vaccine for some other illness is going to make everything better, because illnesses are all illnesses, aren't they? Those kind of ridiculous kind of comments don't facilitate any level of understanding or helping to understand within the child that they're valued and they are important to us. So that's the effective way that I recommend that we deal with kids. And sometimes when kids need a little bit more assurance, we can hug them. We can, if they're young enough, we can let them sleep with us if they need to do that, because they're afraid of getting nightmares. And certainly if they are having nightmares, that would be probably an indication that perhaps they might need a little professional help, as well as to help the parents in coaching them on how to respond to the situation so that they can feel more confident in their parenting ability. not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they may not know all the intricacies of how do you relate to a child and make it sound the way it needs to sound. So that would be the response to kids. Question came in, what's the difference between a panic attack and a heart attack? There's a major difference there. One involves the heart, the other one involves everything going on around the heart, which is the chest. A lot of times we feel that tightening sensation in the chest, and we make the assumption that it's our heart that's tightening up on us. It's actually the muscles around the heart sometimes, because the heart is a muscle after all. But panic attacks are not coronary events. Now, they can escalate perhaps into a coronary event, especially if there's a weakening, already pre-existing condition, or some kind of a situation with the heart where the valves aren't working the way they're supposed to, where you could create a cardiac event. However, panic attacks by their nature are not about the heart. What they are dealing with is a sense of feeling out of control. And as that intensity intensifies because of the stress, that has become a full-fledged anxiety kind of reaction. The panic part is what leads it to getting completely out of control, which was part of what we discussed at our last program, the program before that as well. By the way, those programs are available. Thanks to our brilliant technical person, John, we now have podcasts, which is just a wonderful creation when you're wanting to share information that actually has value to it, which I certainly hope our show does. And you can reach us through Spotify as well as through Anchor, both of those platforms. I think that's what they're called, right? Yes, thank you. I'm actually expanding my technology knowledge. But yeah, you go into those applications and you can actually look for me, Doc Marty, and you'll see these things. One from our last program last week is out there, as well as hopefully today's sometime soon after we're done with our show today. So that's available. We're also out on YouTube. And to get to the YouTube site, you go into the radio station, which is simply www.radio, www.radio, R-A-I-R-A-D-I-O. Yeah, that was the spelling bee thing a couple of minutes ago. R-A-D-I-O. K-A-I-R, which is the radio station's call letters, K-A-I-R.com. And that will bring you into the YouTube channel for the radio station, and you can find my name down on their listing. You just scroll down the listings, you'll see. And they're separated by episodes. So I think 2 weeks ago was episode 11. Or am I wrong? Last week was 11, this one's 12. I'm not quite sure how that goes. But eventually we will get up to 12 and 13 if we've got it already. So just follow the numbers, and the last, besides today, the last two programs have dealt with the reaction to the virus. So that information was off. We are 13. Today's 13. Good, thank you. It's a lucky number. So we're going to move on. We're going to take another break. I know I'm running a little late with that. And when we come back, I'm going to add in a couple of more things, proactive things, that, again, that I would highly encourage people to do. They help us get through the next several weeks, perhaps months, until this thing finally burns itself out and we have found an effective way of responding to it. So we'll come right back in just a few minutes. This is Doc Marty with Mental Wellness. We're coming to you from the wonderful studios in Humboldt, Texas, just outside of Houston. And at the moment, we're all responding to what's going on with the coronavirus. So as we begin to wrap up our program for today, I did want to leave you with the contact information one more time for the emails, which is what I'm responding to. And those are, well, the email address to reach me is docmarty, D-O-C-M-A-R-T-Y 61 @gmail.com. And I have been responding to emails now going on for, gosh, 13 episodes into this thing. And it's really interesting because the amount of email volume has been increasing, which I'm very grateful for. And I'm going to respond to one more email that came in before we close, and that's dealing with the issue of weddings. I am going to be blessed with my daughter's wedding at some point, hopefully this year. It's already been postponed once and now being rescheduled, and fingers are crossed. But be that as it may, the email that came in was not from my daughter or any of her wedding party. It was from a gentleman who was real curious, who asked about social distancing at weddings. And, obviously, the issue that comes up right off the top of my head is if you are trying to avoid contact where there's highly congregated people, that right now might not be the best time for a wedding for obvious reasons. But yeah, how do you do the dancing? How do you do the whole, handing? And I cannot imagine, two people standing up in front of a large gathering of people having to stand 6 feet apart, is changing their vows, as well as the people officiating at the service, and they keep their social distance away too. The whole system takes on this absurd kind of quality to it about how do you proceed with some of these things that normally we wouldn't think about, but now we're having to think about. Well, the obvious answer to the thing is don't do it. And you won't have to deal with some of these things. And yes, I realize there's a cost factor that may be involved with this, and an inconvenience, enormous inconvenience to folks that have been planning these things. Bless you. And yet we find ourselves going through these interesting ways of trying to make do with things we shouldn't be making do with. There's an outdoor chess tournament that was scheduled that unfortunately people were wanting to know, how do you maintain contact or social distance from your opponent when you're both looking at the same board and you're sitting 2 feet away from each other? And how do you make that happen? And of course, they were showing all these absurd things with people wearing gloves and having these long sticks that you would use to move the pieces around the board. So you'd have to maintain the distance. And I'm going, really? If people have to go to those kind of lengths, the event itself, you have to question, is there a valid reason for going on with that event as opposed to postponing it? Because life tends to have a lot of very precious qualities to it, and needlessly endangering it isn't one of those things that you want to be exposing to. So these outdoor activities, even though you're breathing fresh air, is not a guarantee that the virus isn't still being spread, and as well as being, based on contact stuff. So we want to be careful of all this stuff. And again, common sense when you're feeling stressed tends to disappear because we get so preoccupied with the feelings that are underlying the reactions to what we're experiencing. We've still got to maintain a sense of, is this important enough for us to take a risk? And what kind of a risk are we actually taking? And a lot of the kind of flippant kind of responses we were getting out of some people that were occupying beaches during spring break last week in Fort Lauderdale, as well as along the Gulf Coast, South California, is that why should we be concerned about this? It's only the thing that's affecting the older people. And yet, obviously now that we're getting the research, the data that's actually showing that it's not just older people that are being exposed to it, that we're also dealing with the fact that these people are going to be in contact with their parents, their grandparents, which makes them potential carriers of a potentially lethal interaction. So again, the common sense issue needs to take prerequisite over convenience, over want, over joy, over impulsive acting out. So we stay safe, which is my overriding message to all of you, is to stay safe so that we can stay healthy. Mental health deals with the fact that we have to take precautions. We have to be aware of what's going on. We have to make good decisions. And in order to do that, we have to keep our minds relatively free from what the negative impact of stress can lead to. So with that, we're going to close the show. I do encourage folks to spend the time, as we encouraged last program, to take 2 or 3 minutes every 2 or 3 hours, if you're being exposed to a lot of stress, to just simply be inside of yourself. And we do this through meditation. We do this through prayer. We do it by just being contemplative and not overburdening ourselves with things that we don't need to be thinking about or looking at. And just give ourselves permission to breathe and to release tension and calmly experience ourselves from inside. So with that, I bid you a fair good day and good week. And I hope to be back with you again next week.